and welcome to another edition of Convict Inc. I'm your host, Robert Rosso. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please do so. If you like this video, please push like and share with your family, friends, neighbors, enemies, etc. Before there was Pete Rose, there was Art Schlichter. For those of you who do not know who Art Schlichter is, allow me to introduce him to you. Allow me to tell the story. So here's the deal. In 2013 or 14, while I was serving time in FCI Terre Haute, I lived in C Block, and I was good friends with a guy named J Mart and Troy Hockenberry, who were Sullies. Hockenberry had received a sentence reduction, in part because of me, off his direct appeal, and he went back to court for a period of months. During that time, J Mart, who was living by himself, got a new cellie. The cellie was in his 50s, big, tall guy, and people were saying that this guy was an NFL football quarterback at one time. I never heard of Art Schlichter. That's who the person was. And because I was never an Ohio State Buckeyes football fan, and I never followed the Baltimore Colts or the Indianapolis Colts. Art Schlichter, for those of you who do not know, was a hero, a legend really, of the Ohio State Buckeyes football program. And let me just read some of the accomplishments. And by the way, I wrote an article about him. It was posted on thefix.com. That site is currently under construction, and I would be reading it straight from the website if it was not. So I'm reading it from the article that I wrote. Okay, so as a star quarterback for the Ohio State Buckeyes, Schlichter not only did completely change the offense from running to passing, but over his 4-year reign, he broke all Ohio State single season records and Big Ten championship career and total offensive records, and even played in the 1980 Rose Bowl. So Art was a guy who had a promising career in front of him. He was poised to join the NFL from early on. He did join the NFL. And what ended up taking him down ultimately was a gambling addiction. Now let me back up. When I met Art, and by the way, we did become friends, he was in the middle of a lawsuit with the NFL. As many of you know, the concussion lawsuit that a lot of players were awarded money for, Art was a part of that. So, knowing that Art had destroyed his life over gambling, and I'll get into all that, I wanted to know if he believed that concussions that he received from football, starting at an early age and into his professional days, had anything to do with his risky behavior. I will say, I'll just cut to the chase on that and say what he said at the end. I do believe that my numerous head injuries have affected my decision-making throughout my life, but I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I'm not blaming my behavior on anything. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I'm sorry for those who I hurt along the way. And those that he hurt along the way were many. And I'll get into how he hurt people while in prison as well. But let me say this. Art and I became pretty good friends. I used to walk the track with him a lot. We talked a lot, and at the time, I had came up with a gambling theory. While it's not important to get into it at this time, my fiance at the time, Marta, I did have her tested out through legal gambling channels in Spain. Needless to say, it fell through. But Art and I talked extensively about it. He was very curious when I explained to him my whole theory. He was really curious about it. So we talked for months about this. I was on communication monitoring. That means all of my telephone calls, all my letters, and all my emails were being listened to by staff. So before I can receive my emails, they would be read by SIS, which is the institution, which is the intelligence agency for the institution. So they would have to read all my emails to make sure they're appropriate before they can send them in or before they went out to people. During one of the emails, I talked about SBG, that sports betting gambling or something. It's an offshore site based in Costa Rica, I believe, which Art was the one that told me about these sites. Again, this is before gambling became legal in a lot of states. So this goes back to about 2014, I do believe. When I mentioned SBG, I was walking in the chow hall one day, and one of the SIS officers by the name of Corjay pulled me up, and he said, I see what you're trying to do. I know where you got the SBG site from. Stay away from that piece of shit. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, look, by the way, SBG, I'm not betting. Mart is going to, he goes, I don't care about the betting part. I know where you got SBG. You got that from Art Schlichter. Stay away from that fucking piece of shit. I was like, okay. And he says, I'm telling you, stay away from him. He's no good. Now, this is an intelligence cop in prison. I'm not getting any weird stuff like that from Art. I have no idea what they're talking about. Plus, it's a cop or an officer in prison. I'm not going to really pay attention to him. I did go tell Art what he was said. He was very upset and wanted to confront him. And I said, you know, if that's what you want to do, I'll go with you, whatever. But he ultimately backed off. Sure enough, Art gave me a lot of advice about online gambling, and which I then provided to Marta. She did not a whole bunch of money, but there's some money put into it. And at one point, he asked me if I can start doing some bets for him as well. I did not. And let me say this. So Art had an older lady that lived in Indianapolis that he somehow befriended. In fact, I believe he was in prison and she wrote him a letter. She became friends. Art then became close with her, and this lady helped Art out a lot while he was in prison. This lady had a grandson by the name of Ray, who was married. I forgot what the girl's name, but they became a part of my life as well. And this is what I mean. When Marta first came to the United States, who I'm now married to, by the way, she's from Spain, Art played an instrumental role in getting her to the prison. In fact, he was going to have one of his close friends, Marta, stay with one of his close friends in Indianapolis. At the last minute, this fell through. For reasons I would later find out, it was because Art was borrowing money from this guy, money that he hadn't paid back. And this person was, quote, tired of Art Schlichter and his tricks, close quote. I later learned that, and I didn't know at the time what that meant or what Art was doing. Nevertheless, this guy, Ray, did pick Marta up and his girlfriend from Indianapolis Airport. They then drove her to Terre Haute late at night, dropped her off, and Art deserves everything from me and Marta as far as a thank you, and I thanked him repeatedly about doing that. This is all true. He did help us. Once Marta was there, you know, she took a taxi and everything else, and she didn't see Art, Ray, or those people again. And the lady that Art was helping out Art, I should say. I forgot what the lady's name was. It's irrelevant. As the time went by, there were things about Art that I started noticing. The first was that he was involved in betting in prison heavily. And that is in prison, big sport betting operations in prison. We call them tickets. They have, you know, multiple guys will run a ticket, and you bet on the games with stamps. Every day they put gambling slips out. It's got the over and unders of the game, and Art was all over it. So he was really involved, and rumors started flying that he owed a lot of money. Also, I knew he was placing bets on the street via the lady that he befriended, come to find out later. At one point, Art came to me, and he said that he wanted to invest $5,000 into the little gambling scheme that I had. He said that he would send me this money. This went on for months. The money did never come, which was a good thing. It wasn't bad. Then within about a year later, he came to me and asked me if he can borrow money from a family member or one of my friends. He knew that I had some family that wasn't broke, I should say, and some friends that had some money. And he said the purpose of the money was to help with his daughter's wedding. He has two daughters, two lovely girls, I need to add. That never bore fruit. That never happened. Never loaned Art money. I didn't realize at the time what was going on or that wasn't true about the wedding part, but it was all bullshit. The truth of the matter was Art was betting big gambling sites on the street, and he was losing. I would come to find out later from his later than cellmate named Eric, who, by the way, I spoke to last night, or got a message from last night, and will be doing a live with me about Art Schlichter and his time with him. Why? Because, let me get to that. So let me back up. So Art Schlichter and I became friends, as I said. We were friends. My little gambling thing fell through after a period of time. Art moved to G Block, which from C Block to G Block, which was considered the old man's unit. And I started hearing rumors that Art was borrowing money from people in that block and not paying them. Now, when he borrowed money from you, he'd pay you back with interest. So if you borrowed I think he wanted to borrow $5,000 or $10,000 from me, he was going to pay me back like 15. It's all kind of too good to be true stuff. But this was a guy who was moving money around, who was known to move money. If he ran up $1,000, he was paying it back. If he was late, he was giving interest. The yard, everybody on the prison yard knew this for a period of time. And then things started to surface. But before I go there, let me go ahead and talk about some of the interview that I did with Art. Art Schlichter wrote a book suitably titled Busted: The Rise and Fall of Art Schlichter. Now, here's what happened. While he was in college, I should say, Art started betting, gambling on football games. During that time, he got himself, meanwhile, off the field, Art was just starting, okay, here we go. He's talking about, in this paragraph, about getting concussions. And again, he was trying to tie the concussion thing to risky behavior, but not blaming it solely, I should say. Okay. Another time I was in the hospital. Okay. Art was starting to exhibit signs of risky behavior. Although he didn't drink or do drugs, by his junior year in college, his love of horse racing, I said sports betting games. First, it was horse racing he was gambling on. His love of horse racing had turned into a full-blown gambling addiction. So much so that he had borrowed $4,000 from his parents to pay off a bookie that he owed. In his autobiography, Art summed up his time at Ohio State as follows. During the college years, I became isolated and geared into thinking that my job was to play football and my recreation was to gamble. In 1982, Art was drafted into the big leagues by the Baltimore Colts, a franchise he would stay with for 2 years as they moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis before being traded to the Buffalo Bills. During his 3 short years in the NFL, Art says he suffered several concussions, one of which he goes on to explain. And he talks about it, that's irrelevant at this point. In one incident, Art couldn't recover from the, I have a real hard time coming back from that one. The one incident that Art couldn't recover from in his NFL career occurred on April. So what happened was we were talking about the concussions. My apologies, by the way. So we were talking about concussions, and he said that he got his bell rung. He was playing football. I was after the Colts had moved to Indianapolis, and we were playing the Raiders, he said. I got sacked a total of 9 times that game, and I really got my butt kicked. It was during one of those tackles that he got his bell rung and really got knocked out, but he kept on playing. I had a real hard time coming back playing football after that one. The one incident that Art could not recover from in the NFL occurred on April the 9th, 1983. That was a day that Columbus Citizen Journal printed an article with the following headline: Schlichter fears for career life. The article revealed how the NFL became aware of Art's gambling addiction after evidence surfaced that he had been placing bets with 2 con artists posing as bookies, men who were arrested in a sting operation that Art helped with. And while his life was never truly in danger, the article said he was in danger, the guys were posing as mob members, they were con artists. The incident was the beginning of the end of his professional career. After being suspended from the NFL indefinitely, Art went on to play in the United States Flag and Touch Football League. It's fall from grace, right? Spent a year in the Canadian Football League, and ultimately ended up in the Arena Football League, where he played for the Detroit Drive and the Cincinnati Rockers, respectively. He won an Arena Bowl once with Detroit and lost another one. It was during a game with Cincinnati that received his final concussion. Okay. So Art was betting on games. He claims, I believe, that he was never betting on the games that he was involved in. There was a little bit of suspect on that. I got a couple comments saying that wasn't true. However, he wasn't starting quarterback, so I don't know how that would work out. Art started going to prison. What was his first time? His first time that's all related to gambling. In 2006, that was when I was out. In 2006, during one of Art's numerous court hearings, his defense counsel called in the leading expert on gambling addiction, tried to get him out of jail and into rehab. This is from Dr. Valerie Lorenz. Your Honor, she testified, gambling addiction is a disease. He needs treatment. We have a place for him that gets treatment he needs. Being in jail does not help his needs. As a matter of fact, Art had been into treatment numerous times and numerous times since. Moreover, he went on to become a director of gambling intervention organization. He helped counsel other gambling addicts, has given addiction awareness speeches, and even wrote a book about his gambling addiction. Perhaps people should have looked a little closer when he wrote the book. What it wrote in the book, which said, "When I say that the chase is never-ending battle, I mean that it hasn't ended. It probably never will for me. It never gets better, only worse. I never really quit," or he goes on, "since the days in college, all the time when I was giving those speeches, I never would sustain any long periods of time." In fact, when Art was doing these, he was a director, he's involved in 501c nonprofit. He hooked up with a lady in Palm Springs that got him hip to the nonprofit gig. And the entire time that he was doing gambling interventions on rich people, he never stopped gambling. He was gambling. He would get $10,000 for the intervention. He would then take it and he'd go to Vegas and spend the money. He never was clean. That was revealed to him by me. And I believe he put that in the book, maybe not in such harsh terms, but that is the truth. While we were in prison, Art was back in the public eye because a lady by the name of Anita Barney, who was the widow of a former Wendy's CEO and Art's co-defendant, wrote a book. Not only did she write a book, it's called barnesandnoble.com, Quarterback Sneak by Anita Barney. Her name was Anita Barney. She was on Dr. Phil, so we got to see this lady talk greasy about Art on Dr. Phil while in prison. This Art didn't want to really talk about her, but the allegations were, I think, that he was having sex with her and borrowing money from her. Maybe not the sex part. There was allegations he was having sex with older women for money. "I never borrowed money from Anita or anyone believing that I wouldn't pay them back. I spent years of my life chasing money that I borrowed or trying to cover hot checks, believing each time that, in the end, I would win and cover my bets. I always believed that it would work out in the end. It's what the addiction tells you." So he was borrowing money from this lady, and then on and off, what he would do is borrow money and then pay her back. So when I met Art, what his scam was this. He was an announcer for the Ohio State Buckeyes, a sports reporter, I believe, on the field. I believe that's what it was. It's in here somewhere. But what he did was this. He was promising rich people, season tickets. He would, "I can get you season tickets for a deal." He would get the money, gamble it, pay him back if he won, and if he didn't, they would find out at the end that it was all a bunch of bullshit. He got caught. He got hit for, at the time, it was wire fraud. He got 127 months in federal prison for wire fraud, bank fraud, and filing false income tax return. A sentence that was run concurrent with similar state charges. Additionally, Schlichter is one of thousands of former football players who plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit. So let me tell you what he was doing in prison then. Art was in prison for, in all actuality, promising football tickets that didn't exist. Promising season tickets for the Ohio State Buckeyes that did not exist. As he was losing people on the street, he had a good friend that he'd known for years who supported him, who would do his gambling bets for him online, who would go place horse bets for him, got tired of him. I know this because he contacted my wife at the time and said, "I don't want anything to do with Art Schlichter." Marta was actually my fiance at the time. So as he got more desperate, and his bills started piling up in prison, he started borrowing money from inmates. One of them was his cellie, Eric, who he borrowed a total of $7,000, I believe, from Eric's parents. Now, one of the things Art promised Eric and his parents was he can get them Super Bowl tickets. And Art didn't only promise Eric that. He promised numerous guys, at least 3 that I know of, inside G Block, that he was going to give their family Super Bowl tickets. There were people's family who drove to the Super Bowl game. I forgot where it was, what year. I forgot. I want to say Denver for some reason, but I forgot. Who showed up at the game thinking that Art Schlichter was going to have tickets for him there, and they did not. One guy owed him like $3,000, I think, for money in prison, and Art promised him that. Cracked Art in the head. They got into a fight. Art fought him back. Art is a big guy. He is no punk. He does not want to fight, did not want to fight. He acted soft. When push comes to shove, Art Schlichter would go. And he wouldn't check in, back down. He stood his ground. Now, as all this was happening in reality, he started smutting other people up. This person's hot, this person's bad, this person did this. I was one of them. As a matter of fact, he's another one that said that I might be an institutional snitch, or I was, or something. And I don't know why he started dogging me. I believe it was because I found out from his friend on the street who Art was. But I wasn't telling anybody, but that's one of the things that happened. He also was not happy about this article. He did not like this article that he agreed to write, by the way, and I think I gave him $50 for it. I don't remember. From pro NFL quarterback to gambling junkie to federal prison. I should have put gambling junkie in federal prison as well, but I wouldn't do that to him at the time. So Art Schlichter had done time at the federal prison camp in Terre Haute before I met him. This goes back to the 2006. He'd done time there and did the same scam, come to find out. He was also scamming prisoners in the camp about tickets, or they can do this while betting. At the time when he came home, his wife was still, he had a wife for a long time with the 2 daughters. Eventually she left him. They still remained friends. And like I said, he did have a relationship with his daughter. Another funny thing about Art, and I can relate, is that Art's daughter, one of them that was in college, the youngest kid, one day announced that she had a new boyfriend, and this boyfriend was a black guy who looked like Urkel. I saw pictures, he did. And Art was like traumatized at first. Being somebody who was oldest daughter, ended up marrying a guy that was mixed race, being in prison where everything's segregated, it is a shock. And time, as the years go on, more and more white guys experience this as culture changed, as the Kardashians made it cool. But that happened. That was a pretty funny story. Art was a fun guy to be around. I don't want to leave this as I have bad or ill feelings towards him. We had some good times. Again, he helped me and my wife connect on our first visit, actually. I owe him a lot for that. In the end, though, I should say, not to me, but to people that were close to him, his roommate / whatever you want to say, Eric, and a lot of other people, he did some really bad stuff to. They were going to press criminal charges against Art. There was lots of talk about that. There was lots of talk about writing the state prosecutor letter because he did have a time that he had to go do in state after he was finished with the feds. But the truth of the matter is, Art Schlichter is living his own prison. I don't know. He's out. I just saw that he was out right now when doing the internet search. I hope he's doing well. I know that we had serious talks about family issues, background, our parents growing up. So he opened up to me. I don't know if there was always an angle as he opened up, because Art was always an angler. What he would say about me probably is that I was a junkie and then I got high and stuff, and all that's true. I did get high on and off, and talk to him about my addiction struggles. Talk to him openly about it. Suboxone was it at the time. But we had really good conversations. He did get depressed. We talked about suicide because I had those thoughts before. There were times when he was down. I realize now it was probably like somebody coming off drugs, probably coming off big gambling losses, not knowing how to get the money. And at the time, he was feeling down and out. I hope that he doesn't take that route at any time. I'm not sure if his dad did. I forgot how that worked out. But another one of those guys along the road or path in my life, road that I traveled, that I meet, that was an interesting and memorable character. Not only does he have a big name, which provides me for YouTube content, but sure, he was a friend at one time. He sure was. And I did see the deterioration of art. I will say this: a con man's con man. This guy was conning cons in prison. I mean, takes balls to do it, you know? Big money, not little money, thousands of dollars. I'm sure he picked his shots. I'm sure he picked the guys he thought would be less of a threat. Although in prison, anybody, you always got to be careful, because the weakest guy is the one that can hurt you the most. You know, the guy that puts out his chest, roars the loudest, usually isn't the one that's going to hurt you necessarily. It's usually the little guy in the corner that's passive. He can hurt you by hurting you, by that, or by prosecuting or whatever. This will not be the last story about Art Schlichter. There will be a live with Art Schlichter, with Art Schlichter's selling. The family wanted to get some information out because they were hurt, and Eric wants to tell them his story. He's been trying to get me to do the interview for a while. Now he's bogged down. He's got he's moving out of state, but he will be here. I did write the article for The Fix, from NFL quarterback to gambling junkie to federal prisoner. I do remember that there was conversation when this article came out, or his book came out. So people became aware of the book that he wrote. And the book that he wrote, he said that he helped the feds bust, take down the two con artists. So again, when he was a pro football player for the Baltimore Colts, two guys posing as members of the mafia, I believe, who were nothing. They never gave him 1 cent, even on the games that he won. They threatened his life. And he worked with the NFL to do a sting operation to bust them. Now, when you are a civilian and you're not, even if you get caught in gambling, civilians are, okay, so one could look at it like he was involved in the underworld and he was a rat, okay, because he was gambling illegally. At the same time, this wasn't a guy that was a criminal per se at that time. He had not moved into the arena of just becoming a con for the purpose of getting money for gambling. So there's two ways to look at it as far as being a rat. If you're a civilian and you work with authorities, and you're not, but then if you're involved in gambling. So that was a back and forth banter in prison amongst guys that wanted to do something to Art. Nothing ever happened. In the end, they transferred him. I believe he went to South Carolina because he came back from a medical trip. They stopped him and said that his life was in danger. Several times staff came up to him and said they had information his life was in danger. He said, leave me here. Why? His children were just up the road in Indianapolis. It's less than an hour drive from Terre Haute. He had a friend that was up there that come and visit him. A lady that he was seeing would come and visit him. So that's why he wanted to stay. And again, more than $10,000 probably he owed on the compound alone. More than that. I know 7,000 one person, 3,000 another. So I'm going to say 15,000 or up on the compound, or family members of people in prison that he was doing time with, and he did not want to leave. I got to give Art Schlichter that. I don't care what he said about me. His brother could have been a rat. That doesn't bother me. I don't have nothing. So I do hope Art is doing well. Gotta warn people. Sorry, Art. Gotta warn people around Art Schlichter. Don't let him borrow money. Don't let him borrow money. As he said it, he doesn't think his gambling addiction will ever end. I struggle with addiction issues myself, although doing pretty good. Yeah. A con's con, for real. A con man who cons inmates. I don't know what the title of this would be, but Art, you were one of the best I've ever seen, bro. I'll give you that. Best I've ever seen. When you can be in prison for trying to sell, for everybody in that prison knowing that you were on the street getting money from rich people saying you were going to promise them tickets to the Ohio State game and turning around in prison and saying you're giving their family members tickets to the Super Bowl and people bought it, you're good. You're good. The same crime that he did on the streets and that he was convicted of at the time that I met, he was doing in prison to inmates and their family members and getting away with it and got away with it. Nobody got paid back. He won in that regard and went to a pretty decent prison. Edgefield, I forgot which one in South Carolina. It was a good one from what I understand. There it is there. Art Schlichter, this is a story I've been talking about. I said I would do. I'm sure I'm going to go back and go, I left out key points. I know he first went to prison. It was involved money laundering, wire fraud. His first conviction, I'm not sure, but it was the same thing. He's been going bank fraud, hot checks possibly at that time. I think it was hot checks too. Matter of fact, he did a couple different stints in state prison and in federal prison. But that matters not. That's easy to look up online. This was more of a personal story I knew about Art Schlichter. And again, his former cellie or roommate, Eric, will be on at some point doing a live. He said within the next month or two last night, I said, hey, just call me at any time. I can do this now. I can do the interview. We can figure it out. So there it is there. Art Schlichter, one of the best con men I've ever seen in prison. Take care. Hope you enjoyed. And Art, I hope you and your family are doing well.